Oh, that's wow. I guess it was my grandma. She used to love Agatha Christie, and she just devoured these books. And I was always very curious as to why they were so good. So I dabbled in them, read a few bits about them, not the whole books by then, because I was about what 11, something like that. But I thought, you know what, they really sparked me, and I'm going to write. So I wrote a little whodunit for me nan, and it was only about 12 pages long, but I typed it all out, and I even sewed the spine with needle and thread, and I made this little book for her, and she was absolutely over the moon with it, and she loved it, and she couldn't work out who done it, which was the main thing. And after that, I didn't really take anything seriously. When I was at school, I just when I was about 15, I I don't know what it was. I don't know what sparked me. I just decided I was going to try and write a novel, and I did. And I wrote my first novel when I was 15 at school, um, and I was very worried about the word total, because I'd seen these Agatha Christie books, obviously, and they were all round about 45,000 words. I'm thinking, how on earth am I going to be able to write 45,000 words? So that sort of like dominated my thinking. And just from that point on, from when I was about 15, I just used to write anything, any old stories, with no real idea or goal in mind about what I was going to do, or where my writing was going to take me. I just used to enjoy it. Um, and that's basically how I got into it. And I used to sit in my bedroom, bashing away on an old Olivetti typewriter. I mean, we're talking about what? I mean, we're talking about what? About 1970, something like that. 70, 71. And internet didn't exist, and all the things that we have now that make writing comparatively easy, the production of writing comparatively easy. Um, but I had an Olivetti. It was my brother's Olivetti typewriter, and I used to sit in front of it and just bash away, and I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. Um, I left school, started my first job over in Liverpool. Um, W.H. Smith, they're still going. They're older than me. And I I carried on writing. There was a good friend of mine, Norm. I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning him, but we used to write comedy sketches together. So, and we used to record them and distribute them around the staff, and we made films as well. Eight super 8 millimeter films we made, silent ones, but we absolutely loved it. We used to write the scripts and do it. They were great days. We were 16, 17, um, before the specter of women came on the horizon. So we were free to do whatever we want. So that's really how I got into it. There was no system, there was no um, ambition or goal. It was just something I wanted to do, and I stumbled into it, and I loved it. Still do.
In England.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Westerns on TV. I mean, I'd always watched westerns. Wagon Train was the one I used to watch, and I always prefer Wagon Train to Rawhide. Wagon Train for me was the big one. Didn't really get on so much with Bonanza. Um, But Wagon Train, I don't know, there was just something about the fact that they're going across the prairie and they got these wagons. There's always Indians. That's the main thing. That's the important thing. Lots of Indians. And I always wanted the Indians to win. Um, and Western movies, they're just my favorite. They still are. And I love the current crop of movies which are appearing. Kevin Costner, he's just a champion of the Western. and I just love it all. And that's how I learned my Spanish from my from my westerns. So when I came to Spain, obviously many years later, and I used to say to the kids when the end of the lesson, I used to go, "Vamos, muchachos," because I always remember that from the films, and they used to just look at me as if it was insane. So well, that's interesting because I'd had a few books published. Um, I mean, going right back, I submitted my first book back in '79. Um, so still way before the internet. And it took me until 2009, 30 years, before I got a book published with a small independent publisher. And writing a Western never really crossed my mind until a few years later when um, my books were comparatively successful, some of them. And I thought, why don't I write a Western? And the one thing that held me back was obviously I'm English, and I didn't think I'd qualify to write them. Um, until then, of course, I discovered that J.T. Edson was English, and quite a number of other writers. The author of the Edge series. What's his name? I've forgotten his name now. That's terrible, isn't it? But he's English. Um, and a number of others. One of my favorite authors is a man called um, John Harvey, and he wrote a series of westerns for New English Library, and phenomenal writer. And I thought, well, blimey, O'Reilly, if these people can do it and they're English, then I'll do it. And I had this story had been percolating around in my head for years and years and years um, about a Pinkerton. I wanted to make it a little bit different. So I thought that about a Pinkerton detective who was sent out west. And how would he react? How would he fit in? And so the character Sims, Detective Sims, was born. And I wrote this book called Unflinching. And it just it just took off, and it was #1 in Canada, not just for a week, but for, 2 or 3 weeks it was held the #1 spot. And I even had the publisher ringing me up and saying, Stuart, you realize what's going on with this book? And I was like, oh my God. And that suddenly I'd arrived, in the Western genre. And then it was a case of having to write a few more about this enigmatic character, which I did. And he's probably still my favorite character that I've created. So that's how it all came about all those years ago.
Why do you think Unflinching was so popular? What was it about that story
Well, one was the villain. The villain was the most despicable person you could possibly hope to meet, either in life or in fiction. He was despicable, and he had no redeeming features whatsoever. Now, he'd been part of a bank robbery that had gone wrong, and he kidnapped this girl just off the street. He kidnapped this girl who just happened to be the daughter of a very famous colonel in the American Army, and that's why Sims was called in. And I guess it was that the clash of those three characters. You got Sims, who wasn't such a good guy. He was prepared to do whatever it took, and some people got very upset with that. The fact that he shot somebody in the back. He didn't actually shoot them in the back. He shot them in the back of the leg. But people got upset about that. But he wasn't your white hatted um, John Wayne saw character from his early films. He was prepared to go the full way to bring his man in. And he knew that he was after this despicable character. And the girl was in the middle of it all. And she played a very clever game. She kept this horrible, nasty man sweet. Until, of course, Sims arrived and you had the showdown. And So I had classic elements of the Western, in that everything came to the showdown, but there were other elements that perhaps weren't so classic. And I think that appealed to a lot of people. They didn't like the sanitized view of the West. And I tried to make it as realistic as I could. I mean, I did a lot of research. I read a lot about the Pinkertons, and who they were and what they did, and and the fact that they did establish an office out in the West. And I just thought, well, why not have Sims as that man? Sims had fought in the Mexican American War back in the 1850s, and it had changed him, and he was cold and calculating, and but he had a heart, if you know what I mean. Um, he always did the right thing, perhaps with the wrong methods, but he always got there in the end. And I think that sort of combination of all of those things appealed to the reader. In some respects, yes, my latest character, Hamoud, I love Hamoud. He's he's a solitary individual. He's a killer. That's how he first comes into my books. We first come across him in my first series I did for Dusty Saddle about Sean Prentice, the guy who was struggling to come to terms with his new life as a school teacher. And he comes across Hamoud. Fortunately for him, um, Hamoud doesn't kill him. Um, and they sort of like have a grudging respect between the two of them. And later, I wrote a series about Hamoud just himself called The Annals of Hamoud the Killer. Um, and I so one reviewer said he reminded them of Angel Eyes from The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, the Lee Van Cleef character, and I could see that. Although that character wasn't uppermost in my mind when I created Hamoud, I just wanted somebody who was cold, completely cold, a stone cold killer. I sort of had He was a sort of a Charles Bronson sort of character, but stouter, bigger. Um, and funny enough, I'd been to the Army Museum in Paris, of all places, would you believe? And there was this gun on show, and it was um, it was a Whitney conversion, and it just looked fantastic. And it had been converted from a black powder one to take in cartridges in the cylinder. And I thought, that's the perfect gun. It's not very well known. Nobody talks about it. And he's got that, and he does a cross belly draw. So he's a formidable character, is Hamoud. He's changed a little bit. He's mellowed. He met someone, fell in love, and well, we think he fell in love. He doesn't actually say that he loved her, but he's obviously a little bit more calmer. She's got a good influence on him. Um, but she can't come to terms with the fact that when the chips are down, the old Hamoud returns, and he won't listen to excuses. He won't bargain. He'll just use his gun and he'll kill you. And she didn't like that. And they were trying to set up a little detective agency, and they parted ways. And now Hamoud is with a sheriff, a marshal called Charlie Westenbrook, and who's a complete opposite to Hamoud. He's quiet. He's always willing to see the other side of the story. He takes prisoners. Hamoud does not take prisoners, metaphorically as well as really. And that's how the character has developed. But Hamoud is coming back to how he was. He's set off on his own. In the book I'm writing now about him, he's out on his own again. And he sort of like says to himself, you know what? I like this. I like relying on myself. And well, I won't tell you what happens, but we'll see what happens because he's a great character. So that's how I've directed my westerns more towards Hamoud now, and that sort of enigmatic, mysterious, cold-hearted killer, which I love.
A mood.
Yeah, it's interesting that you've asked me that question because that's to be honest, I've always been of the conviction that you should just write what you want to write. You shouldn't be swayed. You shouldn't be um, pointed in a particular direction. You should do what you want to do. Um, Otherwise, you're going to be restricted. You're going to be trapped, and you can't be yourself. And I wanted Hamoud to be enigmatic. I wanted people to think, well, why is this person? Where's he come from? And why has he got this weird name? Hamoud. What does that mean? And I'll tell you where the name Hamoud comes from. Back at school, I used to run a D&D sort of game, and it was a Western game. And I used to put figures on the table, and the kids absolutely loved it. We used to meet on a Friday for 2 hours, and 2 hours went like that, and they loved it. And one of the kids there, he called his character Mr. Hamoud, and I don't know why he called him that. It just came out of his head, and I thought that's a fantastic name, Mr. Hamoud. So that's what he became, and the fact often in the stories, when he introduces himself as Hamoud, people say, "What's that? Indian?" And people say that in a number of books. They say Indian, not as in indigenous, but as in Indian from India. And he would always say, "No, Egypt," and because that's where his family came from. But that didn't answer any questions because the majority of people where's that? Where's Egypt? Nobody knew where it was. I mean, they wouldn't even know where India was. So it was just another layer to this character. But no, I wasn't concerned. I mean, you're right. Western readers are very conservative with a small c. They like things to be just, the way they are. And maybe that, I don't know, because I've struggled to try and get my books better known and to get people to buy them. And and maybe because I don't follow the strict methodology within the Western genre, I don't know. Um, but I look at the Man with No Name in A Fistful of Dollars, and he was the reason that was so successful was because he was an anti-hero. He was a man with a very dark and mysterious past. Nobody knew who he was or where he came from. He was just incredibly good with his gun, and he had um, very few redeeming features. In the first film, he helps the girl escape, um, but by a few dollars more, those aspects of him have gone. He's just completely focused on what he needs to do. Um, so I think people, I don't wish to preach, but if people like Westerns, they should like every aspect of the Western. I mean, I love revisionist Westerns now that are coming out. And you see a more real life Western. Thanks a great deal to people like Kevin Costner. Um, Open Range is just a fantastic film, and he's great in that film, and as is Duval, but it's it takes the genre to a different place, and the violence at the end um, is quite marked, and it's not a sanitized view of the West, and I like that. Another one, the Sisters Brothers. I thought that was a great film. Um, the fact that you've got black powder weapons, um, and they're shooting each other from about 10 paces apart, and they can't hit each other. Um, and the one about with um, I've forgotten his name now. Oh, it'll come to me. It's late. It's late at night. um, the one about Jesse James. Um, oh, I wish I could remember. What's his name? What's his name? He was just in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt, thank you. Brad Pitt was in it. And there's a scene in there in the bunkhouse where they start shooting at each other. And they're just like within 6 paces, and they can't shoot each other because the guns were awful. They were highly inaccurate. Uh, you read about the gunfight, the OK Corral, and the fact that, the bullets, they hardly anybody got shot really, with all the amount of gunfire that was spurted out, because they were so inaccurate. Not many people had a Colt, the Colt or a Remington. They were at the top. These were like the Rolls Royces of the guns, but many people didn't have them. So all of that, I wanted. I wanted to take risks. I wanted to make it a little bit more real life. I wanted to have a side of the story that showed just how tough the frontier life was for these people, um, and how unrelenting it was, and the dangers and the fears. Um, that was the great thing about Lonesome Dove. You couldn't relax for a single second because you always knew that something dreadful was going to happen, with Indians and with renegades and outlaws and all this. With Hamoud, of course, the Indians are um, in the reservations now. Even the Comanche is calmed down, quietened down. But that danger from Indians has been replaced with really very unscrupulous people. So get back to your original question. I wasn't really concerned. Perhaps I should have been. I don't know. But I just wanted to depict things as they were, not as they appear on the 1930s, 1940s Hollywood films and the TV series like Gunsmoke and things like that. Yeah, I think that's it. Absolutely. Once you start thinking, right, I'm gonna write something which is going to sell. I think you're going down a very slippery path there. You should be true to yourself.
Book.
The fact that who this person is, the fact that he is willing to do whatever needs to be done. He's he may not be the most attractive of characters, but he has a certain chivalry, if you like. He will not be um, diverted from his path. He is single-minded in what he needs to do, and the more you read, the more you learn about him. And although he still retains quite a lot of that, those enigmatic qualities he has, you can see there are aspects of his character which are actually quite interesting. So I think those will put people on a good route to discovering more and more, especially in the series I've just created with him, with Charlie Westenbrook, The Man on the Bridge, um, which I think, well, personally speaking, is actually one of my best books. It takes the Western genre again into a different direction. It's a whodunit in many ways. This man is found on the bridge and he's dead. Who killed him? Why? And all of that. And Hamoud is right in the center of that story. So maybe that will be another one to consider.